Sometimes your top talent or the top talent, the people who are very talented at something, are dickheads. Now, every game is a team game. You've got to turn up for work. You've got to feel connected. You've got to feel motivated. You've got to be able to learn. You've got to be able to teach. And for the 2% of extra performance you get, you might lose 20% of cohesion. And cohesion wins games, all games.
Can you achieve extraordinary results while making the world a better place? I'm Bruce Temkin, and together we'll explore how. Welcome to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Join me as I speak with visionary leaders and top experts to uncover the secrets of humanity-centric leadership. Ready to rethink leadership? Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Humanity at Scale. We often think of leadership as a race for results, promotions, or profits. But the most lasting leaders do something far more powerful. They create other leaders. They build cultures, teams, and legacies that outlast their own tenure. I've been especially excited for today's conversation because of a personal connection. After visiting New Zealand, I became a real fan of the All Blacks, the national rugby team that's not only one of the most successful in sports history, but also one of the most admired for their culture, discipline, and values. Our guest today, James Kerr, captured the culture beautifully in his global bestseller Legacy. He's explored leadership in extreme environments, worked with elite military and business teams, and spent years uncovering how culture built and sustained. And for those of you who aren't watching on video, I'll let you know that I'm not wearing my regular Humanity at Scale polo. For this interview, I have on my All Blacks shirt. So, James, welcome to Humanity at Scale.
Bruce, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So before we dig into all that, though, I'd love to start with your personal journey. What set you on this path? What led you to become someone who studies and writes about leadership and culture?
Yeah, interesting question. One way I've answered this before, so forgive me if I'm doubling up, but I had 3 posters on my wall when I was growing up as a child in the south of New Zealand, sort of high country in the south of New Zealand. I had a skier called Franz Klammer, the Liverpool football team, soccer team, and the All Blacks. And I think there's something in fulfilling childhood's dreams or interests that's kind of guided me somehow, sort of surreptitiously in my life, and that I've ended up working or being with all 3. I've skied with Franz Klammer, I've worked with the Liverpool Football Club, and I've worked to study the All Blacks and written some books and been embedded within that culture. And so I think I've always had that interest in high performance, in high-performing environments. I also came through advertising as a kind of a route into business, if you like. And advertising is really about distillation, synthesizing something down into a short, sharp meaning, I guess. And so I guess it was a convergence of both those worlds. And, how do you capture hearts and change minds? And so I was really interested in that idea of identity, of ethos, of storytelling as a tool for change, I guess, within high performance environments. And really it was a convergence of those 2 interests that certainly led me to the All Blacks, led me to writing Legacy, and to the kind of work I do now.
So interesting. I got to believe that when people hear that story, especially leaders from Liverpool, they go, why wasn't the book about Liverpool?
Well, I'm a New Zealander, so the All Blacks are our guys. I live in the UK. I've lived away from New Zealand for a long time, but I kind of still call New Zealand home, or certainly the All Blacks, my home team. And I'd love to do a book on Liverpool at some point. Liverpool is another love, and I think it's an extraordinary culture and an extraordinary team, and an easy team to love, especially right at the moment because they're in winning ways. But there's something very special about the All Blacks, partly because of their ethos, of their culture, but also, depending how you slice it, they are, I would say, almost inarguably over time the most successful sporting unit in recent human history. Their win rate is over 125 years is just a notch under 80%. They've just played last weekend at Eden Park. That's a home ground, and they're on a winning streak at Eden Park of 51 tests. So the Springboks came to try to unthrone them, if you like. The Springboks last won there, I think it was in 1937. Scotland are yet to beat the All Blacks. Wales, another great rugby nation, last beat them back in 1957. So they're an unbelievably successful collective. And that in itself, I think, is worth studying. They're not the same people in the jersey all the time. How does the jersey do so well?
And the jersey does well on the female team, which may
yes.
even be more successful, right? They might even be more dominant.
In some ways, the Women's Rugby World Cup. The Rugby World Cup is on at the moment. The New Zealand, the Black Ferns are the world champions. And so there's something in the water, and there's something in the country, there's something in the soil, the whenua, the land. And they say New Zealand and New Zealand rugby is a religion. There are links between that idea of ethos and as a belief system, I think. It asks and answers some of those same questions. Who are we? What are we doing here? What are we doing with our time here on Earth? What's our purpose? And I think that All Black environment, if you like, the broader All Black environment, has asked and answered some of those questions. And it's a very, very powerful way of being as a group and as a group of individuals. And it creates a very strong collective. And we're talking about, humanity at scale. It's human beings coming in to be better together than they are apart, I would say. And that I think is linked by that belief system, by that ethos, by that culture.
So let's dig into that. So let's dig into Legacy, the book that sort of captures that. Your book's structured around 15 mantras, simple but powerful principles that capture the DNA of great leadership. And I think that probably comes from your advertising days of being able to tell quick stories, right?
Try to hook to hang things on, for sure.
Yep. So, for example, you write about sweeping the sheds, which is the humility of doing the small things, no dickheads, the importance of character, and be a good ancestor, the idea of leaving the jersey in a better place. Before we dive into specific ones, what was it like immersing yourself in that culture and translating it into a set of principles that everyone could use?
Well, it was a privilege. First, it was a deep privilege and humbling in its own right to, it's I couldn't play my way in, but I managed to talk my way in, and it took a long time. And, I think one thing that often surprises people around genuinely high-performing environments is that although they're fearsome on the outside, on the inside they're places of love, really, brotherhood, sisterhood, connection. So it was a deep privilege to be allowed into that space first, and and I'm eternally grateful for that. In terms of converting it, I think what I realized when I was there, and particularly as I was reflecting afterwards, is that I recognized so many of the features that the All Blacks had, or the kind of techniques, it may be the word, or the processes that the All Blacks used around culture and identity I was very familiar with. They are the same techniques that one might use in brand identity formation, values, vision, purpose, how do we define it? And so it felt very natural to distill my body of work or knowledge, if you like, my experience, and use this extraordinary environment as a case study. It was mission creep to a degree. The first book I did with them was called Mana, and it was kind of, Mana is the sort of spirit inside, if you like, or certainly there are many different ways of saying it within the Maori culture. That respect, kind of given, not claimed, authenticity and authority and so on. God, in some ways. And we wanted to go inside and try to capture that essence. I did it with a photographer called Nick Danziger, and we were kind of capturing the All Blacks in black and white. And then there was a little bit of an opportunity, I guess, or a kind of a natural creative progression into exploring what I'd learned and framing it around what I'd learned in my other lives, if you like. And so it was a coming together of that, and it felt a very natural, I think, coming together. It was an expression of ideas and thoughts and feelings that I'd had before, and partly what it means to be a Kiwi, what it means to be a New Zealander. They say in many cultures, if you're going to move house, your friends might give you the number of a removalist. The New Zealand I grew up in, your mates will turn up with a truck. So that sense of that we're all in it together, rugged individuals, but at the same time, mutuality of effort, I think is a big part of that culture and a big part of my mindset, I guess. And I guess it was about expressing some of that.
Cool. So like I said, the book is built around 15 mantras. If you were to go in and talk to the team beforehand, do they have words expressing those mantras that they talked about differently, or did you have to distill it? And when you created that word, they were
a little bit of both. Some of sort of phrases that I heard and took, and I thought were emblematic of what was going on. And some were kind of phrases that I attached to things that they were doing. So, for instance, sweep the sheds. I'm not sure. I don't think that was what they called it at the time. I think they might now. But that's what they did. And it was a very deliberate act of, self-discipline, of doing the right thing, taking care of business, self-reliance, taking care of business. And I think of enacting that idea of legacy, that idea that you leave the world in a better place or at least a decent state, and of humility and a practice of humility. Because, of course, as an elite athlete, the one of the phrases in the group was, success is a terrible teacher. The more successful you become, the more prone to go to your head. And so by finding small rituals of devotion, I guess, of humility, of unpretentiousness, it's the antidote to a real killer for high performance, which is entitlement. So they're very deliberate in that. And in answer to your question, I tried to, synthesize some of that. I called my kind of working program, my own mantras to myself was synthesize, simplify, and storytell. Bring it together, simplify it down into good bite-sized chunks, 15 principles, and then encase it in their story and other stories so that it becomes a compelling read. And that was my approach.
Great. So of the mantras, which one sparks the most reaction or debate when you share with leaders?
Oh, no, Dickheads. Of course, because of the language. And also, I think because in a lot of environments, we think that the dickheads come with the territory. They're earning good fees for the company. They're the rainmaker. And you go, well, I'll put up with that because of what we get, right? Because of the outcome. But, you don't have to. And in fact, if you play in the short term, maybe there seems to be a gain. But in the long term, there's a lot of pain. And you want to flip that. You want to take short-term pain for long-term gain. Another phrase that's been used in the sporting arena is the best people aren't always the right people. You want to get the right people. Sometimes your top talent or the top talent, the people who are very talented at something, are dickheads. Now, every game is a team game. You've got to turn up for work. You've got to feel connected. You've got to feel motivated. You've got to be able to learn. You've got to be able to teach, And, for the 2% of extra performance you get, you might lose 20% of cohesion. And cohesion wins games, all games, really, all team games. And so So there's always a lot of discussion because it comes down to character and the quality of your people. So I think that's a good one. And often when you say no dickheads or whatever the version of is, people think of somebody, and they go, and as a leader, if you're spending 80% of your time dealing with 20% of your people, that's 80% of your people you're neglecting. So short-term pain, long-term gain, or short-term gain, long-term, or the other way around. I think that becomes a question of judgment and culture and standards and non-negotiables. And you want to have, I believe, you want to have non-negotiables that mean you've got that the best people are also the right people.
Cool. So I want to go back to, and I love the no dickheads. That is my favorite. Maybe because the language is so stunning. But I want to go back to sweeping the sheds.
Yeah.
Because and talk about rituals, right? The sweeping set is that the team actually literally clean their own locker room after a match, right? It's a simple act, yet it carries enormous, at least symbolic weight, right? Why do you think rituals matter so much in shaping team identity?
Well, look, you look beyond that. You look into countries, religions, society, where we're very ritualistic in many ways. We shake hands. We give gifts. We are baptized or blessed in one way or the other by whatever church we are part of. We enact rituals all the time. Families have Sunday dinners. You have Friday night football. You have Thanksgiving. You have Christmas. You have Passover. We are a ritual-based society, and rituals are a way that they contain meaning. They contain a lot of meaning. And that meaning is usually about congregation, about people coming together. We live in our mythological worlds and our narratives of the way the world is. And so it's very powerful within a small team. And one of the miracles is that you can create these myths. You can create these stories, these ethos. You can decide what you stand for and what you won't. You can create a vision. You can define a purpose. You can set standards. And then you can create an environment that reflects all of that. And that environment is both physical, your practical environment, but also social. The rituals. When do you meet? So the question I ask of businesses, for instance, is what happens on Monday morning? Rituals often are at the beginning and ends of things. The beginning of the year, the end of the year, beginning of the day, the end of the year. So on Monday morning, what happens? Do people come in and, they bring their own coffee in, they put their headphones on and they do emails, whatever it is? Or do they come together? There's coffee waiting for them. We break bread together and we learn from each other and we set for the week. It's two simple rituals, right? One is a default ritual. It's just, well, whatever. The other is a little bit more deliberate. And you go that second and deliberate one, it might be designed for certain reasons. One, being generous with small things like coffee creates a mutuality and a reciprocity of connection with that group. Breaking bread together is one of the ways that we connect very strongly as a group. It signals that business has begun, and it allows us to learn from each other and exchange relevant information, set goals, and come together in order to execute whatever we want to do in that week. From a business point of view or running a team, which one's going to get better results? Well, I would argue number two, simple ritual, easily invented. So rituals don't have to be hakas or songs. They're just repetitive behaviors or sort of symbolic and practical sometimes.
For leaders who are listening, right, I can imagine them saying, oh, great, I have the answers. I'm going to bring a bunch of bagels and make my entire team have to sit down and eat them on Monday. Or on Friday afternoons, I'm going to give everyone a broom and we're going to clean our own office.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
How do you keep the rituals from make sure they feel authentic and lasting rather than
I think
forced
that's
and gimmicky?
exactly it. I think it needs to be organic. It needs to emerge from what is. And that takes a certain amount of patience and skill, I would say, and creativity and sensibility. I think you can't impose fun on people, you know? It doesn't work. But you can leave a bunch of bagels out and some coffee and see what happens. And then over time, as the bagels and the coffee are out and people skip Starbucks on their way in, and they go, well, it's Monday, there's bagels here, I look forward to that. And then in that, you say, hey, well, we've got you all here. So there's an organic, informal nature to it. You know, cultures are created in conversation, I think. In fact, they're co-created in conversation. You know, you're better to ask questions than to give directions. Hey, shall we? Would it be good if? Why don't we? And so that suggestion, Wayne Smith, one of the All Blacks coaches, has a lovely line. He says, people rise to a challenge if it's their challenge. And so, you know, it's how you create leaders, really, or how you empower leaders at every level. In the military, they say empowerment is people executing a plan they've had a part in planning. So rather than, you know, a phrase I love, no one ever followed a PowerPoint into battle, you know? So ask, don't tell. It's the beginning of empowerment, really. And I think the most powerful, I think leaders have to take a number, it's contextual. There are a number of different ways. Sometimes you need to be more, you know, directional, sometimes more consultative. But I think if you take the idea of a leader as sort of a coach / facilitator, who's there to create an environment in which others thrive, and is able to ask questions to coach people from where they're at to where they need to get to. It's a pretty good place to start as a coach. And coaches ask a lot of questions, because if you tell somebody something goes one in one ear and out the other, and actually you'll get a kind of passive resistance to it usually. Yeah. You know, speak to the hand. Right? But if you ask a question, first you're signaling respect, inclusion, you're accessing the expertise in the room. It tends to be more than your own. These are the people who are doing the work. But also, if I'm being asked a question, I have to internalize it. I have to rummage around and figure out an answer. I have to come back with an answer. I'm engaged already. I articulate that answer, defend it, and then go out and execute it. I own that now, right? That's really what creating leaders is about, I think. It's like, well, what would you do? And then a bit of guidance. And, you know, interestingly, the idea of a coach comes from that idea from a coach, like a horse and carriage coach. It's there to take you somewhere. It might have a predetermined route, but it's there to take you somewhere. So from a leadership point of view, rather than follow me over the hill or go in that direction, it's a bit more, where shall we go together? And I think if you take that posture or that paradigm in the right place for most leadership challenges.
If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss a conversation. We've got plenty more great stories coming your way.
Cool. So you can tell, the listeners can tell that you've worked with leaders in lots of different environments and looked at people who are ascending in different ways. In all those cases, the leaders are, like all leaders, are under constant pressure to win, to get to the next level, right? How do the best leaders keep a long-term focus, right? The focus on people, culture, and values, while still delivering results in the short term?
Well, that's the challenge, right? Always the challenge. And I think I'd look at it in a way, you know, you need to decide where you want to get to. So vision becomes really important. And in vision terms, a lot of the time, we actually have a very unclear vision as a species. You know, you look at organizations and they're a bunch of kind of, you know, feel-good slogans, usually pretty woolly, you know, to be recognized as the leader in something, right? Vision should be visionary. And actually, they should be visual. You should be able to see the outcome, put smiles on the faces of families. I don't know, you know, put a man on the moon and bring him back. There you can see that, right? You can see it, and then you're able to hold that picture clearly in your head. It's a North Star. It's a place that you're going. So that helps you aim big, right? But you can only win the moment, actually. And one of the great lessons from sport is if you're thinking about the end result, you're less powerful in the moment. If you become results oriented, and I think this applies to just about anything, if you become results oriented, your attention is in the wrong place. You need to be on task. So the analogy I use is, you're driving to a meeting and there's a traffic jam. Suddenly you're flushed with panic and you're going, I'm going to be late. Where will I park? Right? What are they going to say? We're going to lose the deal. We lose the deal. My life is over. Right? And it's at that moment that a car comes out and T-bones you on the motorway because your mind's not on the road. Your task in that time was to drive that car safely and swiftly to your destination. There's nothing else you can do to impact the situation. You might ring ahead, right? If you've got a hands-free, all of that, right? But so that's the problem with future-facing thinking. We got to score because we're behind. We got to score. Somebody passes you the ball, you drop it. So you need to get on task. So we need to win the moments, every moment by moment. So being present to the moment and to be able to bring devotion, love, craft, focus, intensity, discipline to the task is what makes the vision come true. So it's a duality. You need to toggle between it, I think. I think there's a Winston Churchill quote, when you're going through hell, keep going. You must trust you have a destination and it will change, but you've got to just keep doing what you're doing. So in a sports psychology way, there's a phrase that we use, which is win. Well, it's defined differently, but what is important? What is important? Or what is next is another way of looking at it. And you might go, what is now? W-I-N, what is now? Well, right now I'm in a car in a traffic jam. Right? What is not? Sorry. Start with what is not. What can't I control? I can't control the traffic jam. So what is now? I'm in a car in a traffic jam. I have a phone with Siri. I can ask Siri to let them know I'm running late. What is now? There's a hazard on the road coming out from beside me. Got to keep my eye on the road. Right? You can be present. What is needed? Well, what I need to do is ring ahead. Maybe I'll take this off ramp and there's a shortcut. Right? So what is next? Indicate. That's what you have to, what is next? What is next? It's the focus on those small things that leads to the big results. You take that in sport, there's no point worrying about the goal. You're worrying about finding space or running a play or whatever it is, doing your role and all of that. And it's the same in life and in business. There's no point worrying about your retirement fund. It's set up an index fund now. I don't know, whatever it is. What can I do now in order to bring about that vision? What is next? What is important? Step by step by step. So I think it's that toggle switch between the two.
I also want to talk about the idea of legacy, right? The leaving the jersey in a better place.
Yeah.
Which is sort of maybe the most forward-looking of the principles, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want you to think about the work that you've done, but take that principle of leaving the jersey in a better place. How do leaders do it now in the current environment, an environment that chasing the future, right? If you think about leaders who are facing even more challenges of uncertainty. AI is disrupting like every type of business. Any thoughts on how you leave the jersey in a better place and think about legacy in the environment that leaders face now and into the future?
And there are a couple of aspects to that. One is it comes down to that big picture. If you have something big that you're up to, throw your hat over a wall and then figure out how to get there. AI, you can either look as a threat or as an opportunity to bring about a bigger purpose. So I think leaving the jersey in a better place, that idea of legacy is really about purpose. It's about the impact that we get to make with our time here on Earth. Now, it's a big question and it's an important question. And sometimes it seems like a soft question. But I think it's a hard question to ask and a really hard question to answer. But it also creates a lot of impact. It is about impact. Nietzsche said, if you have a big enough why, you can work out your how. So in a world that's swiftly changing, it's really tempting to go, well, we'll just survive this quarter. We'll just survive this. But if you can step back and go, actually, we can do that. Or, we're in the insurance business. We'll the choppy waters ahead. So we'll just get down and we'll keep on selling. And that'll be great. Right? We'll just keep using our same model and we'll just keep on selling. Right? Because that'll get us through. Right? But you haven't toggled to that big picture about vision and about purpose, because it might be actually, what is the purpose? Purpose of insurance is to provide, let's say, security and safety in troubled times. And then you might step back and you might go, right, there's all of these threats. AI, you mentioned, there are all of these threats. If our fundamental purpose is about that, how can we use AI to fulfill our purpose? So even on a sort of strategic level, it helps to step back and to think big when you're in that sort of survival mode. There's also a lot of personal impact psychologically. We know that we're happy when we're in service of others, when we're doing something worthwhile. That's where any parent knows, as soon as a child turns up on the, in the house, that your life isn't about you anymore. And that's a good thing. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself, beyond yourself, outside yourself. Now, if you can create a team or an organization that's committed to something beyond personal interest, that's very powerful in this world. Personal interest, we pull stuff, we hoard and we pull stuff towards ourselves. That doesn't necessarily create great results. And I think when you have that contributive mindset, it's not altruistic, because if you create value, you receive value. If you go out there and make a difference for others in the world, that's actually where value is created. So on all those kind of levels, it's kind of, leave the jersey in a better place. What impact can I make? What value can I add? What contribution will I make? What impact? How can I make the world a better place? How can I leave my job in a better place, or this company in a better place, so that my successor can come and stand on the shoulders of giants? There are better questions to ask yourself, I think, from a leadership point of view, because, you think about what a leader is. It's somebody who takes the lead, is future facing, is writing a future history today. And so I just think a better, we talked about the power of questions before and empowering others. I believe that it's the questions that we ask us. So there's a wonderful change management idea called appreciative inquiry, and it's based on, which you'll be familiar with, and it's based on the questions we ask are fateful. It's the questions we ask of each other that lead to the answers that lead to the future. It's a generative act, asking questions. I would argue the questions that we ask ourselves are most fateful. Am I just sort of clocking in and I'm just going to put up with it and do it, or am I going to create something here? They're better questions and they're powerful questions.
Before we get to my 3 closing questions, just one question about your future. I'd love to know of the places that you're thinking in the future, what would you love to study that you're not looking at already? And we won't, and Liverpool doesn't count.
What do you mean Liverpool
You know,
doesn't count? I'm a Liverpool
we're
fan.
taking
I
that
know,
off
I
because I know
understand.
you'd love them. We
Yeah,
already talked
yeah.
about them, but if you look in the future, what would you love to go study that isn't already on your horizon?
Well, that's interesting. There's some stuff from the past. I'm fascinated by the sort of the moonshot and the Apollo missions. I think there's a lot we can learn from. I think the average age of mission control was about 23. They were creating leaders who had the technical chops and would come out and they were making big decisions. They were creating technological leaps with a spacecraft that you could put a ballpoint pen through. And so from a leadership point of view and a mindset point of view, I've always been fascinated by that. I think and of course, it was predicated on President Kennedy's vision, which I mentioned before. Not just to put a man on the moon, but to get him back. There was huge oratory, but there was huge ownership. The classic question of Kennedy visiting what was then Cape Canaveral, later became Cape Kennedy, and there's a janitor, and it's an old cliche almost, but there's a janitor, and he says, "What are you doing here?" as he was sweeping, and he said, "Sir, I'm sending a man to the moon." That idea that there was a real sense of mission, leaving the Jersey in a better place, a real purpose to that effort.
Great. Awesome. So now I'll go into my 3 closing questions, which is the questions I ask all of my guests. First one is, what's one leadership skill you think will become even more important in the future?
I would just say the word connection. I think we are living in an atomized world where this is our kind of, our connector and our disconnector. And yet cohesion, right? A group stuck together around common cause is an unstoppable force, really. It's our competitive advantage as a species. We've got the opposable thumbs and articulate thought and all of that. But really, it's the ability to communicate to each other and coordinate and collaborate in order to execute. That's our competitive advantage. And I think the more we're atomized, the more that individual leaders are able to create genuine human connection through communication, and really through communication, will become more and more valuable over time.
Great. Second question is, if you could wave a magic wand and immediately make things change, what would you do to make organizations more humanity-centric?
I think there's a sort of an awareness that a drive towards efficiency can become inefficient. The kind of mechanization and technologization, if you like, the systemization is very important and very powerful, right? But if you lose that human connection, if you lose intrinsic motivation, and if you're effectively de-optimizing the environment, and there are so many unintended consequences of some of those kind of strategic decisions that often in the medium or long term lead to quite catastrophic results. People disconnect, and most human organs, they're humans working together, and so maybe the focus isn't on efficiency; it should be on effectiveness. And often efficiency, because you can put a number against it, often from the past, say how much we've. I look at candy bars that get smaller and smaller and smaller, and I go, but you're eroding your very brand. And I'm sure it makes sense to you, but there is a point where people just go, nah, sorry, I'm out. you know? And so be very wary of efficiency, attention on effectiveness and what is effective. And sometimes more human practices and processes are actually more effective in the long term than, well, we'll cut layer upon layer upon layer.
Last question I'd like to ask you is, what's one final piece of advice you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Call your mother.
I
Call
love
your
that.
mother. Don't forget to live your life while you're living your life. Often, if we're ambitious, we put all our weight on our ambition. But a life well lived is not just what you achieve. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from Pericles, and he just said, and it's about legacy. He says, your achievements aren't written on stone monuments. They're woven into the lives of others. And again, I guess it's with that connection theme, reach out, be connected, communicate, be yourself plus 20%. Call your mother, be in touch. All of those things are so important, because when we look back, those are the moments. It's the doing the stuff we love with the people we love is really, to me, what life is about. And if you can bring that into everything that you do, and then I think it's sustainable, and it's satisfying, and it makes a real difference. So that.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to end it. Thanks for joining us today, James. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too, Bruce. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our conversation with James Kerr. Now let's dive into the after show, a segment where I'll reflect on the key takeaways from this episode. Welcome back to the after show. James Kerr's book, Legacy, has become a touchstone for leaders everywhere, and for good reason. It shows how the All Blacks, the most successful rugby team in history, have sustained a winning rate of nearly 80% over more than a century. That's an astonishing level of consistent excellence. I had the chance to experience this firsthand in New Zealand at the All Blacks Immersive Center, where you stand inside a life-size video of the team performing the haka. For those unfamiliar, the haka is a traditional war dance filled with chants and movements that the All Blacks perform before every match. The haka is both scary and totally impressive. You feel the intensity, but also the unity. And as James reminded us, they're not the same people in the jersey all the time. So how does the jersey keep doing so well? That's the power of culture, not just talent. Here are 5 takeaways from our conversation. The first is that humility keeps success from rotting. The All Blacks sweep their own locker room. James called it a practice of humility, an antidote to entitlement. Success can easily create arrogance. Rituals of humility keep the team grounded. The second is that talent without character is a liability. The blunt mantra, no dickheads, always sparks conversation. James explained, for the 2% of the extra performance you get, you might lose 20% of cohesion, and cohesion wins games. Standards around character are not optional, they're decisive. The third finding is that rituals make values visible. The haka and sweeping the sheds are great examples of rituals that encode identity and purpose. As James put it, rituals are how we enact a myth. They bring our ethos to life. In business, even small rituals can be culture shaping if they authentically reflect values. The fourth is that presence powers performance. Vision provides direction, but James warned, if you're thinking about the outcome, you're less powerful in the moment. Leaders must toggle, hold a North Star vision, but focus on the next task with full attention. And the final lesson to me is that legacy is stewardship, not slogans. The All Blacks say, leave the jersey in a better place. James quoted Pericles, your achievements aren't written on stone monuments. They're woven into the lives of others. Leadership is measured by what outlasts you. So let me leave you with 2 questions. What rituals and standards are you building that will endure after you're gone? And when people look back, will they say that you left the jersey in a better place? That's something for all of us to think about. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thanks for tuning in to Humanity at Scale, Redefining Leadership podcast. Remember, true leadership isn't only about achieving short-term results. It's about creating a lasting, positive impact on all of the people you touch. Join me next time as we uncover more insights and strategies for humanity-centric leadership. Until then, I'm Bruce Temkin, encouraging you to lead with purpose and empathy and to be the spark that elevates humanity at scale.